Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Vedic Astrology Podcast. My name is Fiona Marks, and I am your host for today. And I am delighted to have a guest with us who is going to help us continue the theme that we've been exploring with Ernst and Ryan around astrology and the therapeutic application of astrology towards counselling and how astrologers and counsellors are the same and how they're different. So to help me explore this really important topic, I've invited a dear friend and colleague whose name is Suzanne Balka. Suzanne, could you say hello to everyone today?
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Suzanne. And can I ask you to share with everybody listening, what is your current role? What is it that you do day to day in your work?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I work as a licensed professional counselor in private practice, and I see patients with all kinds of mental health concerns, mostly mood disorders, anxiety, relationship struggles, all kinds of things. Obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, things of that nature. So I utilize cognitive behavioral therapy as a modality to help these individuals. And basically that's just based off the notion that if you can change how you think, you could change how you feel. I've been in practice for 9+ years, so it's been quite a journey.
And this is, I imagine, for all of you guys, this is a time that's busier than ever since the pandemic. I think people are experiencing stress in their mental health, perhaps more than ever. So I can imagine you're super busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. Can you tell us a little bit about why did you choose to study psychology and counselling, and then maybe follow that up with why then study astrology and particularly Vedic astrology?
I've always been interested in psychology and understanding human behavior and why people do the things they do, and understanding just the inner workings of the human psyche and how we're just all really interconnected in that regard. And I've always just really had a desire to help people. So it was just natural to put the two together and become a counselor. So yeah, and then just my interest in psychology kind of naturally progressed into learning astrology as well. And first started off with Western astrology, and then I found Vedic astrology and just started really being so consumed with watching YouTube videos on it and reading articles and blog posts on it, and just really got absorbed into Vedic astrology. And it really, I think, blossomed my understanding of, how people think and why things are the way they are, why people do the things that they do. It was like studying astrology turned on a light bulb for me. So,
gosh, that's amazing, isn't it? Because you have a degree in psychology, right? It's many years of study at the university level. Absolutely. Yeah, and then to find that astrology can still shine light on that, I just love hearing that.
There's so much to study. It's unbelievable.
And what about how do you use Vedic astrology in your current work?
I think Vedic astrology is super, important. Such a wonderful tool to use to help people, to give knowledge, give understanding, provide information about a person and why they might be struggling in a certain area of their life, or why they might be struggling internally, why they might be more predisposed to depression or anxiety, So I think astrology is such a wonderful tool to look into those psychological components, or that blueprint that the person carries with them, their karmas, so to speak, that they carry that really offers a lot of relief to the patient when they understand that, you know what, I think as part of life's design, this was just part of my karma, part of my, destiny, if you will, or life path, to sort of go through certain experiences, go through certain challenges in order to develop the soul, in order to develop the personality and to develop spiritually, this sort of thing. So I think astrology is just, oh my gosh, without astrology, it's kind of like trying to navigate through the dark. Astrology just really helps to turn on that light and helps people tremendously. I think just the knowledge of understanding, okay, I have this, certain planetary combination in my chart, or this certain Avasthas, or whatever it might be. And that just provides a lot of relief, because I know that I'm not crazy. I'm going through this for a reason. And I think just having that information is very healing in and of itself.
Suzanne, it's really powerful what you're saying, because it kind of opens up the context of what we're speaking about in a counselling relationship, in that you're talking about karma, and we're talking about depersonalizing some of the shame or the blame or the baggage that we all carry. But do you find that all clients are open to that? So sometimes patients are not interested in astrology, or they object to it or react to it.
That is very true. I think this is very interesting because some people, they don't really believe in astrology or whatever it might be. And I might look at their chart and can see, okay, well, I probably understand why, that's Saturn predominant in their chart in some way. So they're more of a realist, this sort of thing. A person can be disconnected from astrology, but astrology is not disconnected from them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I never impose onto a patient. It's really if they want to dive into that, then of course we can do that. But if they're not, some are not, and that's okay too.
And do you feel that, how is it recognized within the profession of psychology? How is astrology looked upon? Is it gaining more acceptance or more respect, or is it still considered to be something not scientific and not appropriate?
I think it depends on what person you talk to or what community you talk to. But I would say there's still that divide between the two, psychology and astrology. They're looked at two different studies altogether. But yeah, there's so many correlations in my opinion. But yeah, and I think also too, the psychological community will describe something. They just have different language for it, but they could be describing the same thing that we would explain through astrology. It's the same concept, but there's just different labels for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely overlap. It's just that psychology and astrology have different labels for it.
Yeah. And so then let's start to explore what are some of the differences between being an astrologer and being a counsellor? Like you said, there's overlap, but there are differences. What things stand out for you as the difference between a counsellor and an astrologer?
I do agree that there can be a lot of overlap, to be a good astrologer and versus a counselor. I always think that empathy is important. And sensitive astrologers are learning to be empathetic, right?
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. But some of the big differences, I think astrology is kind of like I think it's a lot of it is information, providing information to the patient. And then they can really take that information and apply it to their life and make changes on their own. Whereas I think with a therapist, the therapist kind of helps to hold their hand in making those changes, or to take that information and apply it in some way. For example, if a person has, Moon Saturn conjunction in their chart, that would provide the patient good information to know that, hey, you kind of have this personality tendency with this Moon Saturn combination, that you might be more prone to kind of looking down on all the problems in life and more prone to feelings of depressed mood. So that could be very healing to have that information. However, a counselor would say, okay, well, let's look at what are those negative thoughts that you tend to think over and over, that you sort of struggle with. And let's take that a step further and understand, are there any distortions in that negative thought? Is there another way to look at this? And there's so many different tools and techniques to help someone crush their negative thinking and to really kind of help reverse their negative self-talk through repetition plus emotion, doing certain activities on their own where they can help to reprogram their unconscious mind and their negative beliefs and their negative thoughts. So I think that's where counseling can kind of take the next step with the patient. But I really feel that an astrologer can definitely be a healer in the information that they provide, because information is power, and having that power really helps the person to make changes.
I think astrology really has that history of guru, and I don't mean that as having someone that you give up all of your, you become devoted to, but I mean in that the remover of darkness sort of sense of the word guru, that astrology can really throw light on something that was in the darkness for the patient, and
yes.
And it can be very hard to work with when you can't see what it is. Whereas as soon as astrology kind of turns on the light and it's very clear where the chess pieces are laid out and why the strategy is not working and it keeps creating a certain chess move that's always being defeated, astrology can turn the light on and suddenly it's like, oh, so just stop moving the pawn into that position. Okay, well, I could do that.
Absolutely.
So that the astrology can do that. But as you say, if the person wants support with brainstorming, what sort of steps do I take here? How do I change my behavior? That can sometimes be perhaps beyond the knowledge of the astrologer. We just haven't had that training in applicable behavioral change methodologies.
And of course, the patient too has to take responsibility. I think there's nobody, no astrologer, no counselor, no therapist that can, make the changes for you. The patient has to be in the driver's seat to make those changes and to apply the tools and strategies that are presented to them by the counselor and the information that's provided to them by the astrologer.
I think this is really key, and it really strikes me that I'm sure you've had these sessions as an astrologer where you know that you are turning the light onto something and you are clearly articulating it for the person, and they might even just about be grasping it, but you can see, and they know it as well, that, could you tell me that again? Let's go over that. It's like it almost disappears as soon as it's been described and contained in words and sort of articulated. The subconscious it's disappeared again, and we need to go over it. And it makes me think about those Avasthas around being awake, sleepy, and asleep, that sometimes I think when our karma is asleep, we can have the light turned on and we might briefly grasp it. But then very soon we've forgotten what it was. And that's where perhaps also a counsellor working with someone on an ongoing basis with a an agreed methodology. You know, we're going to do this over several weeks and come back and report to me. And it helps the person keep that Avasthas awake rather than falling back into being sleepy.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point.
All right. And then another difference that I really see between counsellors and astrologers, and I guess this depends nation to nation and jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but my idea is that counselling is a more regulated profession, that often there are professional standards, maybe there's supervision, maybe there are recognition bodies or professional bodies. There might be some like codes of ethics or preventing harm to clients, all of that kind of structure or infrastructure that creates a professional standard. Whereas astrology is a little bit still out in the wild, wild west, isn't it? It's very hit and miss, that the astrologer that you might encounter and what their level of training is and what their level of empathy is. And generally, there aren't any professional ethical standards. Would you see that as one of the major differences as well?
Yes, absolutely. Profession of counseling is highly regulated, and you have to upkeep your license and renew your license every 2 years, and take an ethics course every 2 years, and take a jurisprudence exam, and all these sorts of requirements to upkeep your license. And yes, astrology is not under any of that sort of requirement. So yeah, there's that is a difference with that as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that would concern me as a client going to see an astrologer, is the risk that the person isn't qualified to deal with the kind of trauma or suffering or pain that I'm experiencing. I don't know whether they are. I don't know that I have any protection from perhaps them even maybe causing me more trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's such a good point. Absolutely. Yeah, you do have to be very careful what you tell the patient, the client, because yeah, you're dealing with their lives.
Yeah. So when do you think astrologers can get out of their depth when working with clients, even with the best of intentions and, you know, with some rigorous training that they may have had? Do you think that there are no-go areas or areas that are really high risk?
You know, the person has to be wanting to change, right? We can do harm if we say that we try to force change on to the client, you know. And I think that's something that as a counselor that I've done a lot of study into, or a lot of training, how to motivate the patient to make changes, how to make them want the changes versus trying to chase them around to make them change, right? So I guess we have to just be careful. I guess maybe astrologer can go out of their depth if they try to force change onto a patient, or they try to be judgmental in some way when it comes to the person's chart, even by what they share or how they say it. So context is everything when working with a client, a patient. Context is everything, and being very careful with your tone of voice, what you say, how you say it, the words you use. So I think these are the ways that astrologers can be out of depth, as they can provide information that might be harmful in some way. And of course, if a patient client is asking specific questions about that, that would be one thing, versus an astrologer just giving out information that the client patient is not even asking about. So I think that's key as well. And I think that goes along with that, trying to chase them and enforce change on them. It has to be the patient, the client's will or wanting to do that. So I think that's how that could be one way they could be out of depth.
It's fascinating. This leads me into, maybe I want to come back to the out of depth, but it leads me to another question that I wanted to ask you, which is, you know, what do you think it it is that an astrologer would learn if they went to school to become a licensed counsellor like yourself, or to become a psychologist? What is it that they would learn? And what I'm hearing in what you've just said there is a lot of mastery of language, of managing the context of the conversation, and taking care of the person's mental health by the way that we deliver information.
Absolutely. I think if an astrologer were to take some courses on counseling, that they would probably learn a lot about, communication, how to communicate empathetically, how to emotionally connect with a patient, client, and how to be there in an unconditionally positive way for the patient, and be non-judgmental, and sit there and contain the patient, go to the gates of hell with them, and really kind of be with them in that space. That would be a huge thing. That's, something that is taught in counseling, is how to be empathetic, how to emotionally connect, how to be unconditionally positive and accepting and non-judgmental, to deal with sensitive issues so that the patient is comfortable enough to open up. So I think that's a huge part of counseling, and something that astrologers don't really learn. You just kind of have it innately, or you don't.
Yeah. And I think this is as part of that practicum year that Suzanne and I met each other and shared together. We do 42 readings with clients, and the client gives feedback and the astrologer gives feedback, and then the teacher assesses both of those documents. So I guess that makes 84 pieces of data about how this astrologer is working. And as I now mentor students on that practicum year, and as I've taken over the certification pathway for the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program now, I would say that that's perhaps one of the areas where student astrologers really notice the skill gap is how do you might have the astrological insights, maybe because you're practicing, you're a student, but maybe you have that. But how do you negotiate the conversation and the relationship required to transmit some of that information? I think that I often receive feedback from astrology students that, oh my goodness, I've never been in that situation before. I don't really know how to do that. I think it's a bit of a skill gap, unless, as you say, the person innately has it, or has previously in another professional role had that kind of relationship management experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. Astrologers would really do well with learning some counseling principles, and really just how to have that sensitivity in the reading with the patient, and how to emotionally connect. And I think that could really, really be a useful tool to combine with providing that information.
Yeah, and I think that's a project that we'd love to maybe build some of that, build an extra module now, that helps fill some of that skill gap, because it's just so key. One thing is having the insight from the astrology. So as an astrologer, you've got information that you know is relevant to the questions the client has asked, but maybe there's a skill gap in delivering that. So keep your eyes and ears open, and you never know, we might have something to share in a little while in the future. But before we freak all of our astrology students who might be listening to this podcast, before we freak them out entirely, when I was asking you about the difference between a counsellor and an astrologer, one of the images that came to mind when you were answering that question made me think about how one can go see a doctor and get some blood results that might let you know that it's time to address something around your health, maybe something around nutrition, maybe something around your physical activity. So the blood results will give that insight that perhaps the cholesterol has become an issue, or perhaps some other things are showing that we need more aerobic exercise, whatever, these blood results, and that it is very valid to see a doctor who can report that data and know whether that data is within the realms of normal or whether it's extraordinary and whether we want to take action on it. But that a person may walk out of a doctor's office going, great, I know what I've got to do. I'm going to change my diet and I'm going to join the gym tomorrow. And off they go. And that might be the only interaction that they ever needed. But there might be a whole bunch of people who, from that conversation with the doctor, now that they've got this knowledge, now they actually want to go see a nutritionist, and they actually want to find a personal trainer at the gym who can help them build a program. Maybe they'll go learn some meditation or yoga if, maybe the blood results were about blood pressure, whatever it is, but they might want to work with other professionals that will help them build the lifestyle that will improve their health. And so when you were saying this, the difference between counsellors and astrologers, I was thinking that in some ways, in my role as an astrologer, I see my role a bit more around that doctor giving blood results, in that I'm shedding light on the lay of the land, and that it's very clear to me that the person has then the freedom to go choose to work with other professionals like nutritionists or coaches or whatever they would like to do. Do you feel comfortable that astrology can be used like that someone with a good astrology qualification can help someone analyze their blood results, but the actual day-to-day changing the lifestyle routines might come from a different professional?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's a great analogy and a great way to compare it. Astrology maybe versus a counselor or a psychotherapist. The astrologer is really going to be good with providing some really in-depth information, very analytical, very scientific information to the patient, and the counselor, psychotherapist can help them to apply that information, or how to take it a step further with that information, how to make changes with a negative or a difficult, challenging combination or planet they might have in their chart. A counselor, psychotherapist can help them work with that planet and improve it.
Yeah. And so that's why I think as astrologers and student astrologers, we don't have to freak out that we're not counselors, because that's not necessarily where our specialty is at. But what we do need to work on, ideally, is being that good doctor that you see who gives you blood results. I think we've all been to good doctors and not so good doctors, and sometimes you come out of a session with a doctor and you're like, empowered. Okay, I know what I need to do, and I'm going to go off and find some answers to this situation. And sometimes you go to a doctor who maybe doesn't have so many of those people skills, but still gave you the correct information. But you sort of walk out feeling, wounded or less empowered. You might feel like there's no hope for the situation. Where do I even turn to? So what we want to ensure is, as astrologers, while we might not be counselors, we do still have those skills around delivering information in a way that is empowering and hopeful for the person, rather than just disregarding that they may have emotional responses to what we're saying, and therefore we need to speak in a mindful way.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah. So going back to astrologers getting out of their depth, so that we kind of took a big loop around that, because we were talking about how astrologers can get out of their depth when perhaps they don't have the language skills to contextualize information for the client in a way that is supportive. But I was maybe fishing for there. Do you think that there are some mental health conditions that are not appropriate to work with as an unqualified layperson? And I don't know the answer to that, Suzanne. I just am asking.
Yeah. Okay. Or who an astrologer can sort of provide information for or work with, or.
Yeah, I just wonder, in terms of getting out of our depths as astrologers, would you be concerned if someone with particular mental health issues chose an astrologer, and maybe sometimes do clients with particular mental health issues that don't want to confront them, or maybe are afraid of the health profession? Do you think sometimes people avoid dealing with their mental health through using astrology? I have no answers to these questions. I'm just asking them.
Yeah, it's such a thought-provoking question. Patients who have severe mental health issues, schizophrenia, or, things of this nature that just really might interfere with their capacity to understand the information being provided to them cognitively or intellectually in an intelligent way, because of their mental illness. I think too, you do want to be careful working with someone who is severely depressed. You want to really the astrologer just really needs to have a lot of sensitivity, and they have to be ethical, and they have to really provide information in a way that's not going to be more harmful to that severely depressed patient. So that would just be sharing information based on what they need, and not sharing anything that can be harmful, that the patient is not asking about. I guess that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
I think this is the same question that I just asked you, but maybe now that I've, got a few more words, I'm thinking a bit the contrast between the 12th house and the 6th house, that the 12th house has an escape kind of energy to it, as well as lots of other things, but wanting to escape, and spirituality has also that transcendent quality. And this is why we see these indicators both in the 12th house of transcendence and enlightenment and moksha, but also escaping and avoiding. And I'm contrasting that with the 6th house of day-to-day routine and doing the hard work that it takes to change one's life. And I think the question that I'm fishing around here is, can you imagine the situation where someone is choosing astrology as their therapeutic model because it has a bit of an escape quality to it, whereas seeing a counsellor, it's going to mean 6th house. It's going to mean doing daily attention to change routine and behavior.
Yeah, it's such a good way that you explain it. I kind of the difference there with the 12th house and the 6th house. I can definitely see that, and how that might apply to someone who is mentally struggling, mentally ill, or what have you. Yeah, they could use the astrology as maybe as an escape, and to maybe avoid some of the hard work that they would need to do to make those changes that are necessary here for our day-to-day life.
Yeah. And maybe that is something that I see as a bit of a risk in some ways, that astrologers can, and I think it is important that we give people hope. And so astrologers can perhaps give people hope, mm-hmm, and make it seem like it's all got a reason and there's all an explanation for it. But in general, an astrologer is not going to be that 6th house person on your back saying, so, we met last week. Have you done what it was that we thought would be a good approach? And astrologers generally don't have that 6th house role in people's lives.
Right. Such a good point. And I think an astrologer too, depending on who you go to see, it's usually kind of maybe it's a one and done reading kind of deal. Right? And so after the information is provided, the session is over, the contact with the patient is over. But with counseling, it is kind of like you take on a role in their lives on a consistent week by week basis to kind of walk hand in hand with them, making those changes and see that they reach those goals for improving mental health.
Yeah. All right. So another astrological combination that comes into mind with this get out of their depth is maybe something going on in the eighth house, maybe like a Rahu something in the eighth house or the 12th house, or eighth lord in the 12th house, and with Rahu involved, where one is the person experiencing that setup in the chart is maybe feeling their psychic boundaries are quite open, and that they are receiving information that's very intuitive. I'm wondering whether astrologers, because they're also working at that intuitive level sometimes, and they're also working at that like archetypal pattern level, is that a helpful thing, or is that where we do get out of the depth, and whether a counselor would ground the client better?
Oh, that's such a great, that is a great question, actually. It also depends on the kinds of modalities that the counselor uses. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very, I think, practical in the here and now. And it's just looking at their current life perspective on a conscious level.
Maybe my intuition here is that if somebody is feeling psychically overly open, that counseling is maybe a safer modality because it's going to be practical, be grounded, be evidence-based.
I could agree with that. Yes, absolutely. I could also see it really diving into those eighth house issues too. And, if Rahu's there, it's kind of, it's a place that we don't have a lot of experience with. And so that could be difficult with somebody with Rahu in the eighth house and working on some of their deeper psychological complexes. And so, yeah, a counselor would be really good to kind of walk with them hand in hand and navigate that territory and to develop that house. And it's okay to kind of dive deep into these issues. And that's where great healing can happen as well. I think the process of a counselor being there for the patient, client, week after week is grounding in and of itself and provides that stability.
Yeah, I think so. And I really also want to zoom out a bit and say it's exactly a person with Rahu in the eighth, or with lots of things going on in their eighth house, or the eighth lord in a prominent place in their first house or somewhere. These are exactly the people that are going to be interested in counseling, interested in psychology. Probably they are already psychologists, so I don't want to at all give the idea that if you have Rahu in the eighth, or if you have a lot of things in your eighth house, don't go to an astrologer. Most of us who are interested in psychology will have something going on with our eighth house for sure. And it very well may involve Rahu as well. So maybe that leads us towards, do you think there are any planets that particularly suit people towards counseling?
I think somebody having a good Jupiter would be, this person might be open to receiving good counsel or providing good counsel. I also think having a good Mercury might be important as well. You have to communicate in sessions with your therapist or your astrologer. So having a good Mercury would be important as well, to be able to communicate, and also to be able to assimilate all of the information that is being provided, and to be able to, apply that and to be able to make internal meaning with what is provided. Having a good Mercury would help you do that as well. Yeah.
And then just throwing you a very general question, now that we're speaking about planets, how do you work with different planets in your counseling sessions? If someone has a particular issue with a particular planet, are there things that you find helpful? And obviously you can't address all planets, but maybe there are some ideas or cases that you remember that stick out as particularly planetary.
One I get a lot is working with someone's Mercury, because Mercury is the great time manager, right? The manager of our life. So if someone has a Mercury that's just not so strong, maybe it's, in enemy dignity, maybe it's, doesn't have very good Shadbala, perhaps, it's Chestabala, whatever it might be. Counselors work with people's Mercury all the time. One is through waiting to the last minute, procrastination, not managing their time effectively. So, there's a lot of tools to help a person in that example with time management and procrastination to improve their Mercury, such as a lot of times people procrastinate out of just feeling overwhelmed and their project that they have to do. For example, they have to file their taxes or whatever. It's just so overwhelming to think of all the things they have to do. So they procrastinate on it. They don't get started. We might look at what is their self-talk? What are those, what are the tempting thoughts that keeps them procrastinating? We look at that. And we also, one tool is we will break down a overwhelming task into smaller steps. And then we look at, what is the level of difficulty? We predict what is the level of difficulty? What is the level of satisfaction with doing each small step in that larger task? So we put a percentage there, and then they actually go and do that step, and they realize that it's actually less difficult and more satisfying than they thought. So, different tools like this can really help a person improve their Mercury.
Fantastic. Thanks, Suzanne. I think this is what helps us really see that difference between, as an astrologer, I can point out that the Chestabala is low or that it's in a difficult Avashta or difficult placement on the chart. But those processes that you already have in place, that that you can help work a person through this procedure, that's stuff that we don't necessarily have. So you've given us a really concrete example. Thank you so much for that. And then what about, do you think that there are ascendants who are more suited to counselling, more likely to come for counselling? Have you had any thoughts about different ascendants?
I honestly think that all ascendants can benefit from counseling.
Yeah, for sure.
Every human being, even therapists themselves, can benefit from therapy.
Yes.
No one is immune. Certain ascendants that I think might be really drawn to therapy, I think might be a Cancer ascendant, because they're very sensitive and emotional. And so they would probably enjoy talking about their feelings and really connecting there and having that safe space, because they get to talk about their feelings. And that's important for a Cancer.
I always reflect with ascendants on that second house of speaking, right? So you've suggested Cancer, and that means that it would be the sun, the ruler of the second house. So when they're speaking, it's actually the sun, the spirit. It's a karaka for the soul, isn't it? So the chance to speak is perhaps one of the most soul satisfying things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that you picked that ascendant. Yes, but I cut you off. Were there other ones that you were going to reflect on as well?
When you look at a person's ascendant, it's not just the ascending sign, but also all the other signs that rule each of the houses, for sure.
Yeah, like it makes me think about Capricorn ascendant. It's an earth sign, and they are very humble, driven people. But Saturn is also ruling the second house of speech, and it makes me think that maybe it's hard for a Capricorn ascendant to speak about themselves, because they are so humble, to speak because Saturn is so aware of its flaws that, they just feel, very exposed. So I wonder whether Capricorn ascendant it takes courage to come to counselling if you're a Capricorn ascendant.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure it does. Yeah. Some people, it's really, really difficult for them to open up and share how they feel, right?
Mm.
So maybe somebody who's very predominant with Saturn got a Moon Saturn conjunction, that Saturn starving the moon, or just some strong Capricornian energy or Saturnian energy can maybe struggle with opening up and sharing how they feel because it's vulnerability.
Mm.
They struggle with that vulnerability.
Yeah. And maybe Ketu with the moon or Ketu in Cancer, giving one that sense of perfection with one's emotions and
yes,
not wanting to reveal any imperfection around emotions and thinking that they should be controlled.
Oh, I think you nailed it with that. That is one common core negative belief people tend to have is what we call emotophobia, and that the only acceptable emotions are positive, happy ones, and all the other ones are not acceptable to feel. And a lot of it comes from how they were brought up in their family dynamic, and all that comes out in counseling, if they happen to make it into a counselor's office.
Yeah. Gosh, well, just like planets, we could talk about ascendants all day long, but we're getting towards the end of our time. So why don't we see what we can bite off in the enormous topic of Lajjitaadi Avasthas, because I think this is a really natural place where psychology and astrology seem to be sharing a lot of the same turf. How do you see the Lajjitaadi Avasthas integrating with psychology? When we did that course together, did you have lots of oh my goodness, that's I see that in my work all the time, or we call that this term in my work? Did you see a lot of commonality there?
Yeah, I definitely think that my brain was making associations between what we learned in that class and my background in psychology. And one that kind of sticks out for me is a Saturn Venus conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn Venus Avasthas, Saturn starving Venus. I think I think a lot of the planetary avasthas and combinations can play out in a person, for example, Venus and their relationships, what they attract into their experience, can help us to see more about that. And it can also glean a light into a person's attachment style. I don't know if you've heard of attachment theory.
Tell us a little bit about that, Suzanne.
Yeah, attachment theory is really there's 4 different attachment styles. There's the securely attached individual. There's the anxious preoccupied attachment style. There's the dismissive avoidant attachment style, and there's the fearful avoidant attachment style. And according to attachment theory, these attachment styles are sort of developed from a person's earlier childhood experiences, from their childhood development and how their caregivers, their early childhood caregivers treated them and nurtured them or didn't nurture them, etc. What kind of home life they had, what kind of parents or caregiver they had. And through those experiences, the child learns about themselves and learns about the world and learns and develops a sense of self. And they could either be a securely attached individual or insecurely attached. And that gets kind of pre-programmed in the unconscious mind. It kind of is this imprinting that takes place. And then later down in the road, when this person is an adult and they enter into adult relationships, those attachment styles get activated. I really think it's juggling nature versus nurture. And it's the person's childhood upbringing combined with, their planetary avasthas. Maybe they've got this Saturn-Venus conjunction, right? And they were brought up in a household that, they were neglected or something of this nature. They did not get all of their emotional needs met from an external source, which again would be that Venus, right? And so that could develop more of either an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment. I'm thinking with Saturn, it might be more avoidant. So there's definitely comparisons you can make and correlations you can make. And the Avasthas course definitely helps to shine a light in a different context, some of the same principles that might be kind of like what we were discussing earlier. Astrology and psychology might be discussing something very similar. It's just with different labels.
Totally. And it's really fascinating what you were just speaking about, because it came up in the last episode with Ernst. So if people want to go back and listen to the second interview with Ernst Wilhelm and Ryan Kurzak, that was about having more love in your life. We talked about this whole process of imprinting the karma that the being has come here to experience, the need to imprint that karma that's existing in the mind body of the incarnation needs to get imprinted onto the meat suit, as Ernst was calling it, and how in early childhood, the traumas that we're experiencing that, as you say, imprint onto the psychology for our attachment styles later on, is an important part of how the karma that the chart has to give, how that karma is made available to be resolved in this lifetime, is by making sure that one has these experiences. So it was a fascinating discussion, and you've brought it up again here, and I think this is why the Lajjitaadi Avasthas are so rich, and particularly picking on those Venus Avasthas, because Venus gives us that sense of higher fulfillment and of satisfaction with our emotional experiences, as well as the moon. And when we have Avasthas, negative Avasthas affecting the moon and Venus, one can have a real sense of emotional needs not being met.
Absolutely.
Just feeling that really deeply, that no matter what one does, this feeling of unmet needs is being triggered. So,
and then you can kind of see, it's really very interesting. It's kind of like, was the person meant to be going through those experiences? Were they meant to be born into the family that they're born into in order to experience what's laid out in their chart?
Yeah.
Big questions, right?
Exactly. Big questions. This is what we talked about in the previous episode. I actually put a trigger warning on the episode because it's kind of like, if you have some unresolved trauma, this may not be, or if you have some unresolved childhood trauma, this may not be the episode that you want to listen to, because,
right.
You didn't pull any punches about, where that's really coming from. So, yeah. All right. So we've covered loads of ground, and maybe if I can bring us towards wrapping up this topic, before I asked you about what would astrologers learn if they took some education in counselling, let's perhaps wrap up around what would counsellors learn if they took some education in astrology, and how you alluded to it even right from the beginning, how much greater the context of a person's life becomes, their spirituality, their energetic body, all of those things. So what do you think, and what has been your experience if counsellors received education in astrology? What would they gain?
Counselors would really gain so much to be able to help their patients. I really feel like it's like it's just a tool. Now, there's a lot of tools that a counselor has, but I think if they had some knowledge, even just a little bit on astrology, and that would just be a huge tool that they can use to help their patients get better. And so I really feel that it would be beneficial for all counselors to study astrology, right? To understand and to kind of have a more comprehensive, deeper dive into why things happen for people. So I definitely think it would just be kind of a light bulb experience if more counselors could study astrology, for sure.
For me personally, in my healing, I think that Jupiter side was really important, that spiritual context, or that integrated context that I am a body and an emotional body and a mental body and an intellectual body and a bliss body, that I needed healing on all of those levels. And perhaps when I sought out counselling, that worldview wasn't large enough for me to heal some of the pain and trauma that I had. So I do feel that astrology or Vedic philosophy can offer a much bigger, deeper, integrated understanding of what it is to be alive.
Yes.
And for me, that opened up areas of healing that I couldn't access through a linguistic, maybe mental sort of model.
Yeah, such a great point.
Yeah, so we've both got a lot to learn. Astrologers could learn a lot from counselling. Counsellors could learn a lot from astrology. Of course, another thing that you've alluded to is that, studying someone's astrology is like getting a map in advance. You just know where the peaks are and where the real stress points are going to be. And you also kind of know energetically the contributing factors to that, where things are getting sabotaged. So you can just get directly to the issues. Again, that depends on whether the client wants to do that. And we've spoken about how important that is. But I would imagine as a counsellor, one of the advantages of studying astrology is it's like getting the cheat notes in advance.
I just want to add to that too, that whenever I have a patient in front of me and I look at their astrology chart and I can examine it for a minute or two, I instantly feel so much more connected to that patient because I've looked at their astrology chart and I understand more about their inner workings and how they think and their personality and their psychological makeup and this sort of thing. So when I look at their astrology chart, I just feel so much more connected to the patient. And I think all counselors can benefit from that because you really get to peer in, like looking through a microscope and looking, at some very important data through that microscope by looking at a person's astrology chart, that if you did not have that, you would not see a lot of important data that could help you help the patient. And so I really feel that counselors can benefit from learning astrology, just like you would look through a microscope and analyze what's there in front of you. So yes, it definitely helps. It's just like turning on a light switch. You just see so much more clearly by looking at a person's astrology chart, and you're able to understand the person when they explain things, because then you can relate that to their astrology chart, and it just brings everything to life, and it brings your knowledge and your intuition to life. And there, when we feel that we're connected with the patient and we can understand them and where they're at and we can meet them, that's where we can help them the most.
Wonderful. Well, Suzanne, I have really enjoyed exploring this territory with you today. And I kind of have the feeling that we've just had the chance to dip into a few insights that you have about the practical application of astrological knowledge in a counselling session. I wonder if there are listeners who are interested in hearing a little bit more about particular combinations. Maybe get in touch, and I might see if I can get Suzanne back one day. What do you think?
I love that. This is so much fun.
Great. Well, thank you for your time and so generously sharing your perspective. And I do hope that we get to work together in the future on that extra module that we have a vision for, about bridging the gap for astrology students who are ready to start giving sessions, and how to have that empathetic language and more confidence in providing a safe space to discuss important information. So I'm looking forward to working with you in the future.
Same here. Thank you for having me today. It's been a pleasure.
Great. And thanks everyone for staying with us and listening to the content today. If you have some follow-up questions for me, please be in touch and I will see what we can do about getting another episode together. And until next time, be well. Bye.